welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today, we have a special guest, attorney Murhaf Abu Saleh. He hails from the Druze community in Israel in the Golan Heights. His father is the leader of the Golan Heights community, and Murhaf is, in addition to being a lawyer, is also an assistant to his father, heavily involved in Jewish affairs as well as in Israeli politics. One of the things he's doing now is suing Hezbollah for the deadly and devastating attack on a Jewish village that killed 12 children in the course of the escalation between Hezbollah and Israel. With him today, we'll be talking more about the Jewish community issues and concerns, starting and especially with the recent developments in Syria, which is, of course, high on the agenda these days. Thank you so much for joining us today. And, I'm going to start with a kind of a basic question. First of all, let's start by asking who are the Jews exactly, for those in the audience who are not familiar with the community, and then we'll kind of get back into the rest of the discussion.
1 minute. You asked me to get background about the Druze community?
Yes, just for the sake of the audience who may not be familiar.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay, who is the Druze? The Druze community in Middle East numbers approximately 1.7 million people distributed across several countries, about 800,000 in Syria, 300,000 in Lebanon, 150,000 in Israel, and 20,000 in Jordan. Additionally, there are about 400,000 Druze living in the Americas, Europe, Australia, and Gulf countries. The Druze in Syria represent the largest concentration of the Druze community. The Druze community is characterized by values of peace and social integration, is not missionary oriented, and doesn't seek to convert others to their faith, but rather aspires to live with dignity and peace wherever they rest. Throughout history, the Druze have maintaining good relation with their neighbors, avoided confrontations and conflicts, and chosen peaceful ways to integrate into their environment. Another important characteristic of the Druze community is the complete equality between men and women. This equality is expressed in many areas: equal inheritance rights, the right of women to request divorce exactly like men, and the prohibition of polygamy. It's not possible for a man to be married to more than one woman at the same time.
And I understand it's a separate and unique religion. Can you expand a little bit on that, because I think many people don't know.
What's this, Serena? What you
It's
asked?
about this distinctiveness and origin of the religion, of the Druze religion, of the Druze faith.
Okay, what is the historic of the religion of the Druze base? You can I answer to you this question after that the break. Okay, like
Sure.
this is right to you. You want to start it in the question that you sent me recently?
Sure.
Okay.
So, given what you just mentioned about the dedication of the Druze community to existence and to peace, how has this historical commitment influenced their response to the recent crisis in Syria?
Okay, the Druze historical commitment to peace and coexistence has been central factors in shaping their response to crisis in Syria. The Druze community is characterized by values of peace and social integration. They are not missionary folks
Mhm.
and don't seek to convert others, but rather aspire to live with dignity and peace wherever they rise. Throughout history, the Druze have maintained a good relation with their neighbors, avoiding confrontation and conflicts, and choose a peaceful way to integrate into their surrounding. This commitment to peace has influenced how the community deal with the crisis under El Shara rule, with the split in Druze leadership between the conservative, stern demanding, practical implementation of Druze rights before dialogue, and the pragmatic stream supporting continued dialogue even in the Korean difficult reality. Despite these different approaches, there is a widespread agreement on the need to protect the community and its right through peaceful means. Okay.
And what challenges are arising from the Jewish community's preference for integration over political dominance in given Syria's shifting political landscape?
The Druze preference for social integration over political dominance poses significant challenges in Syria's changing political landscape. The Druze community is characterized by value of peace and social integration, and in Syria, the Druze community aspire to liberal state that respects all its citizens, grants them equal freedom and rights, and enable life with mutual respect alongside state institutions. These challenges have become more severe under al-Shara rule as the government and constitution bear a radical Islamic character that doesn't represent all components of Syria society. Minorities suffer and live in fear, with acts of violence against them receiving neither condemnation nor legal treatment. The preference for integration uh, over political dominance has led to a situation where the Druze find themselves particularly vulnerable in the reality of al-Shara's rise to power, with the community finding itself under existential threat in its Syrian homeland.
So, how do the conservative and pragmatic approaches within Jews' leadership reflect the broader tensions between ideological steadfastness and realpolitik?
The split in Druze leadership into conservative and pragmatic streams reflect a classic tension between ideological consistency and political realism. The conservative stream take a firm and uncompromising position. It opposes negotiation with al-Shara's force and demands practical implementation of Druze community demands before any dialogue. In its view, there is no point in approaching the Korean government until Druze rights are respected in practice. In contrast, the pragmatic stream supports continuing dialogue even in the Korean difficult reality. It believes in negotiation as a way to achieve gains despite the hostile attitude from the governments and sees open communication channels as a vital means to protect the community interests. This tension reflects a border dilemma that many minorities face in hostile environments. whether to stick to principles and oppose a hostile governments, or try to find pragmatic ways to protect the community interests through dialogue and negotiation. Despite the disagreement on method, there is a widespread agreement among all STEM and Druze leadership on need to protect the community and its right.
In what ways does the rise of the al-Sharia regime highlight the vulnerabilities of minority communities in post-conflict Syria, if we can call it post-conflict?
The rise of al-Shari's regime dramatically exposed the vulnerabilities of minority communities in Syria. Since the change in government, the Druze community has fallen into a severe crisis. The reality on the ground is completely different from the external image. The government and constitutions bear a radical Islamic character that doesn't represent all components of Syrian society. Minority, especially the Druze, suffer and live in fear with acts of violence against them receiving neither condemnation nor legal treatment. The vulnerability is especially evident in the direct attack on minorities. In March 2025, a widespread attack was carried out against the Alawites in the Latakia area, and in late April, May 2025, Druze settlements were attacked. The results were devastating. More than 110 people were killed. Druze holy places were burned, and many families were forced to leave their homes. The case of the Druze highlights how minorities who even aspire to integration and coexistence may find themselves under existential threat when a regime with an extreme ideology that is intolerant of ethnic and religious diversity come to power.
How does the Jews' commitment to gender equality contrast with the prevailing societal structures in Syria?
The Druze commitment to gender equality places the community in a clear contrast to the traditional social structure in Syria, especially under government with a radical Islamic character. An important feature of the Druze community is the complete equality between men and women. This equality is expressed in many areas, in equal inheritance rights, in women's rights to request divorce exactly like a man, and in the prohibition of polygamy. There is no possibility for a man to be married to more than one woman at the same time. These positions stand in contrast to social and legal systems that tend to grant different rights to men and women, especially in the context of marriage, divorce, and inheritance. The the contrast is sharpened in the face of the rise of a regime with Islamic tendencies, which may promote legal system that grants a different status to men and women in these aspects. This gender equality is part of the border but liberal conception of the Druze, who adhere to liberal values similar to the Western worldview. They support the human rights, individual freedoms, freedom of religion and movement, and coexistence based on mutual respect.
What factors contribute to the Jewish community's aspiration for a liberal Syrian state, and how viable is this vision given current realities?
Several factors contribute to the Druze aspiration for a liberal Syrian state. First, the value of the community itself. The Druze adhere to liberal value similar to the Western worldview. They support the human rights, individual freedoms, freedom of religion and movement, and coexistence based on mutual respect. Second, the Druze tradition of coexistence throughout history. The Druze have maintained good relation with their neighbors, avoided confrontation and conflicts, and chosen peaceful way to integrate into their surrounding. Third, the recognition of being a minority in a multi-religious and multi-ethnic society leads the Druze to support the view that Syria is a multicultural and denominational state where all groups, Sunnis, Christians, Alawites, Druze, Kurds, and others receive equal treatment. However, the current reality poses significant challenges to this vision. The government and constitution bear a radical Islamic character that doesn't represent all components of Syrian society. Minorities, especially the Druze, suffer and live in fear with acts of violence against them receiving neither contamination nor legal treatment. In this reality, the Druze vision for a liberal state seems more distant than ever, and the community finds itself under existential threat in its Syrian homeland.
Hmm. What factors, how does Al-Shara's policy of granting citizenship to foreign jihadis impact Syria's ethnic and religious balance? We've heard a little bit about that on the news, but there hasn't been a very comprehensive discussion of this concern.
And Sharia's policies of granting citizenship to foreign jihadists threatened to dramatically change the ethnic and religious balance in Syria. A particularly worrying aspect is that the jihadists active in Syria are not originally Syrian. Their idea didn't grow in Syria, but entered from outside its border by fighters who arrived during the civil war. These foreign elements lack familiarity with Syria's complex social fabric. Many of them are not Arab, don't know the language, and are not aware of Syria's complex ethnic makeup. Nevertheless, al-Shara declared his intention to grant them Syrian citizenship and integrate them into senior position in his security forces. This policy poses a special threat to minority communities like the Druze, as it means introducing a new population that not only does not recognize the Syrian complex ethnic religious fabric, but part of which may hold extreme hostile view towards non-Sunni minorities. The attacks that have already occurred against the Alawites and the Druze hint at the potential for continued sectarian violence that could intensify with the granting of citizenship and officially status to these foreign fighters.
How do geopolitical considerations shape the Western policy of quote unquote cautious engagement with the al-Shara regime?
The West's cautious engagement policy toward al-Shara's regime is shaped by several geopolitical considerations. The United States and European Union are taking this approach, offering limited dialogue with the new regime while setting clear conditions. They demand that al-Shara protect minorities, including the Druze, avoid giving foreign fighters position in security forces, and maintaining stability. Regional stability. A central consideration is that the desire to prevent chaos in Syria and limit the influence of countries like Russia and Iran in the region. This policy reflects the Western dilemma. On one hand, fear of strengthening radical forces and instability. On the other hand, wanting to reduce Russian and Iranian influence. However, there is a criticism of this policy, highlights the gap between statements and reality. The international community must reconsider its cautious engagement policy, given the large gap between declaration and actual behavior on the ground. All progress in relation with the al-Shara regime should be conditional on clear demands, an absolute ban on attacking civilians and harming religious and ethnic groups, and bringing those responsible for recent atrocities to justice. Atrocities to justice.
What has disinformation, such as forged recording, played in exacerbating sectarian violence against the Jews? I mean, we talk a lot about disinformation in the West, but clearly this is not the only arena where fake news can make a real life impact.
Actually, false information has played a crucial role in intensifying sectarian violence against the Druze. A specific case in late April, early May 2025, the Druze settlement were attacked following a forged recording in which a Druze sheikh was supposedly here cursing the Prophet Muhammad. Despite the recording being proven fake and community leaders wrongly condemning any insult to the Prophet, attacks on the Druze continued. The violence resulting from this fake recording was especially severe. The results were devastating. More than 110 people were killed, Druze holy places were burned, and many families were forced to leave their homes. The attacks entirely focused on Jaramana in the suburbs of Damascus, and later on the cities of Sahnaya and Sharafiyat Sahnaya, which have Druze majorities. This case illustrate how false information can quickly ignite sectarian violence, especially in a politically and religiously sensitive environment. Particularly troubling is that the violence continued even after the recording was exposed as fake, indication deeper motivation than just reaction to an alleged insult. The fact that authorities didn't effectively act to stop the attack highlights the dangers of spreading false information in situations of sectarian tension.
How does the Druze leadership's fragmented stance affect their ability to advocate for the community's rights?
The split in Druze leadership has complex impact on their ability to promote community rights. There are two main streams. The conservative stream take a firm and uncompromising position. It opposes negotiation with al-Shara forces and demands practical implementation of a Druze community demands before any dialogue, while the pragmatic term support continuing dialogue even in the current difficult reality. On one hand, the split may weaken the community by lacking a unified position and a clear voice before the authorities. On the other hand, the different approaches allow the community to adopt a more complex strategy. The conservative still maintaining clear principle and a red line, while the pragmatic still enable communication channels to be kept open. Despite disagreement on methods, there is a widespread agreement among all stems in Druze leadership on the need to protect the community and its rights. The shared goal is to protect the Druze community and its values, even if the way to achieve it are disputed. This agreement on the ultimate goal allows the different terms to work in complementary way, even if not fully coordinated.
In what ways does this Druze historical avoidance of proselytization shape their interactions with other Syrian communities?
The Druze historical avoidance of religious conversion is a central characteristic that shaped their relationship with other Syrian communities. The Druze community is characterized by values of peace and social integration. They are not missionary focused and not seek to convert others, but rather aspire to live with dignity and peace whether they raised. This approach allows the Druze to be seen as a community that doesn't threaten the religious identity of other groups, which has led throughout history to better relations with their neighbors. Throughout history, the Druze have maintained good relations with their neighbors, avoid confrontations and conflicts, and choosing peaceful ways to integrate into their surrounding. The avoidance of religious conversion is part of the border Druze perception that sees Syria as a multicultural and multi-denominational state where all groups, Sunnis, Christian, Alawis, Druze, Kurds, and others receive equal treatment. This view emphasizes the importance that the Druze place on mutual respect and the coexistence of a group with different religious identities.
Hmm. How does the gap between Al-Shara's international image and on-the-ground governance affect the Jewish community's survival prospects?
The gap between Al Shara's international image and actual government puts the Druze community in a particularly dangerous situation. Al Shara presents an external image of a pragmatic and wise leader who maintains good relations with the Arab and Western countries. He had managed to form a government and pass a constitution in a relatively short time and has received some support from the international community. However, the reality of the ground is completely different. The government and constitution bear a radical Islamic character that doesn't represent all components of Syrian society. Minorities, especially the Druze, suffer and live in fear, with acts of violence against them receiving neither condemnation nor legal treatment. This gap endangers the Druze for two main reasons. First, the international support al-Shara receives strengthens his position and make it harder for minorities to challenge his policies. Second, the West's cautious engagement approach may not be effective enough to protect minority as long as the international community focuses on declaration rather than ground reality. The international community must reconsider its cautious engagement policy given the large gap between declaration and actual behavior on the ground and warns that without a change the Druze will continue to live under an existential threat in their Syrian homeland.
How can international pressure be leveraged to ensure minority rights in Syria under al-Shara's rule?
There are several concrete ways to leverage international pressure to ensure minority rights in Syria under al-Shara's rule. First, the international community should reconsider is cautious engagement policy given the large gap between declaration and actual behavior of the crowd. Second, all progresses in relations with al-Shari''s regime should be conditionally on clear demands, an absolute ban on attacking civilian and harming religious and ethnic group, and bringing those responsible for recent atrocities to justice. Third, the international community should recognize the suffering of the Druze and other minorities and apply effective pressure to ensure their rights and security. This recognition is a critical first step for applying focused pressure. The conditions that the United States and European Union are already setting for al-Shara include protecting minorities, including the Druze, avoiding giving foreign fighters position in security forces, and maintaining regional stability. Structured enforcement of this condition with real sanction in case of violation could be a more effective pressure tool.
What lessons can be drawn from the Druze experience in Syria regarding minority resilience in volatile political environments?
The Druze experience in Syria provides several important lessons regarding the resilience of minority community in volatile political environment. First, the vital role of peace, value, and social integration. Throughout history, the Druze have maintained good relation with their neighbors, avoid confrontations and conflicts, and chosen peaceful way to integrate into their surrounding. This approach has contributed to their survival throughout history. Second, the importance of balance between ideological consistency and political pragmatism. The conservative stream take a firm and uncompromising position, while the pragmatic stream support continued dialogue even in the current difficult reality. This combination of approaches allows for protecting principle while conducting pragmatic negotiation. Third, the danger of over-reliance on external protection. The West's cautious engagement policy was not effective enough to protect the Druze, with a large gap between declarations and actual behavior of the crowd. Fourth, the need to maintaining a unique culture identity based on liberal values similar to the Western worldwide, while striving for a multicultural and multi-denominational state where all groups received equal treatment. This vision provides the community with a moral compass and long-term direction, even in times of crisis.
How did the international community recalibrate its approach to al-Shara's regime in light of ongoing attacks on the Druze and other minorities?
The international community must reconsider its cautious engagement policy given the large gap between declarations and actual behavior of the crowd. Recalibration should include one, clearer conditions. All progress in relations with al-Shara's regime should be conditional on clear demands, an absolute ban on attacking civilians and harming religious and ethnic groups, and bringing those responsible for recent atrocities to justice. Second, or two, moving from words to action. There is a need for effective pressure to ensure the rights and security of minorities, suggesting a shift from declarative policy to concrete steps. Three, critical examination of the external image. Al-Shara present an external image of a pragmatic and wise leader. Well, in practice, the reality of the ground is completely different. The international community should more critically examine the gap between declaration and external presentation versus the reality of the crowd. For enforcing existing conditions. The United States and European Union demand that Al-Shara protect minorities, including the Druze, avoid giving foreign fighter position in security forces, and maintaining regional stability. Stricter enforcement of these conditions and imposing sanctions in case of violation could be a first step to changing the approach. 5. Recognizing the real danger. The international community should recognize the suffering of the Druze and sorry, 1 minute. 5. Recognizing the real danger. The international community. 5. Recognizing the real danger. The international community should recognize the suffering of the Druze and other minorities as a first step toward formulating a more effective policy. This recognition should lead to reconsidering the basic assumption of the cautious engagement policy, which was intended to prevent chaos in Syria and limit the influence of countries like Russia and Iran in the region, but in practice has not succeeded in protecting minorities. There is a need for a fundamental change in approach to prevent the continued suffering of the Druze and other minorities in Syria under al-Shara's rule.
Let's talk about what Druze faith is in very basic terms for the audience, and how has the esoteric nature of this faith influenced community cohesion and relations with neighboring religious and ethnic groups.
The historic nature of the Druze faith has significantly influenced community cohesion and relations with neighboring groups as a religion with secretive elements. Druze faith create clear boundaries, yet is non-missionary character allow Druze to be perceived as a community that doesn't threaten the religious identity of other groups. The Druze have always aspired to social integration rather than political dominance, championing value of peace, mutual respect, and coexistence. These values, along with liberal concepts like complete gender equality, strengthened the internal cohesion of the community and enable it to preserve its unique identity. Also, these characteristics previously contribute to good relations with their neighbors. Today, under al-Shara's rule, their religious and value-based uniqueness makes them more vulnerable to a regime with an extreme ideology that is intolerant of ethnic and religious diversity.
How did the Druze community of Sweden navigate neutrality during the early years of the Syrian civil war, and what shifted over time?
At the beginning of the Syrian civil war, the Druze community in Sweden faced uncertainty while trying to maintain neutrality. The battle lines weren't clearly drawn, and the Druze believed they could achieve dialogue and understanding among all components of Syrian society. They viewed this as a passing period that would resolve peacefully without having a clear picture of the future. A significant turning point occurred when Sheikh al-Aql in Syria, the religious leaders of the Druze in Syria opposed sending their sons to serve in the Syrian army in places far from Jabal al-Druze. They demanded that the Druze recruits serve only in Druze areas, refusing to fight against the Syrian population during the civil war. The Druze wanted to protect only their settlements and not be involved in the broader conflict. This resistance led to a tragic event on July 25, 2018, when, with Assad's approval, ISIS forces were brought to Tel El Safa, a mountainous area near Sweda province. They launched a surprise attack on the Druze, killing 350 people and kidnapping 36 others. Also, the Syrian government under Assad later presented itself as having rescued the hostages. This was not entirely accurate. This event marked a turning point in the Druze relationship with Assad's regime and their role in the civil war.
What security and political concerns do Druze communities have under the new Syrian unity government led by Ahmed al-Shara, especially given his Islamist past?
The security and political concerns of Druze communities under Ahmed al-Sharah's new Syrian unity government are deep and significant. The central problem is that this government doesn't faithfully represent all components of Syrian society, but is painting in one color, having a distinctly radical Islamic character. Despite el-Shara appointing a Druze minister, an Alawi minister, and a Christian female minister in his government, the essence of the government and its decision making is carried out by al-Shara's own people without genuine participation from other Syrian components, especially minorities. There are many doubts about the substantive nature of the positions given to minorities and their actual influence on the overall situation. Al-Shara's Islamist background raises serious concerns among the Druze, especially given the gap they experience between the new regime's external declaration and the reality on the ground. Minorities, especially the Druze, live in fear, with violent incidents against them receiving neither condemnation nor legal treatment. The Druze fear this represents an existential threat to their community, which throughout history has championed value of peace and coexistence.
How did Druze perceive al-Shara's efforts to distance himself from Jabhat al-Nusra's legacy, and what would constitute a meaningful break in their eyes?
The Druze aspire to replace Assad's rule in opposition against him in the main square in Sweda, Sahat al-Karami. They were among the first to enter Damascus on December 8, 2024. Their aspirations, like those of a large part of the Syrian people, were to transform Syria into a liberal state representing all components of the Syrian people, where Syrian themselves would govern Syria. They wanted to build a proper state with civil laws that would protect the rights of all Syrian components. However, the disappointment was great when it became clear that the established government and the enacted constitution were painted in one color only, meaning they had a radical Islamic character that doesn't represent Syrian society as a whole. Moreover, many of the central positions in the new government and the new security forces were given to people from outside Syria's border. Foreign fighters who arrived during the civil war, some of whom are not Arab, don't know the language, and are not aware of Syria's complex ethnic makeup. In the eyes of the Druze, meaningful separation from Jabhat al-Nusra's legacy would only be considered if al-Shara took concrete action to create a liberal state that respects all its citizens, grants them equal freedoms and rights, and enable life with mutual respect. This would include an absolute ban on attacking civilians and harming religious and ethnic groups, and bringing to justice those responsible for acts of violence against minorities. The Druze sees the current situation as a great and existential danger to their future in Syria.
What are the risks of new confrontations between Ashraf's national forces and Druze defense groups and militias in Suwaida and surrounding regions?
The rules are characterized by a historical principle whereby they don't intend attacks but maintaining good relations with their neighbors and with all ethnic and religious components of Syria. However, it is clear that if al-Shara's forces attack, interfere with, or harm the Druze, they will not remain silent and will respond in self-defense. The risk of new confrontations increased due to the gap between the Druze aspirations and the reality created under al-Shara's rule. The Druze no longer want to live in a failed state. They aspire to a democratic state that takes into account all components of the Syrian people and minorities. They want to be an integral part of the Syrian states, and they have a significant history in the liberation of Syria and the struggle for its independence. It's important to note that the Druze have an important historical legacy in Syria. In 1925, when the Syria revolt against the French occupation arose, the leader of the revolution was Sultan Bashar al-Atras from Sweden, who was the supreme leader of the Great Syrian Revolution that liberated Syria from French occupation. Therefore, the Druze see themselves as an essential component of the broader Syrian identity and will not accept being marginalized or having their rights violated.
How, what lessons were drawn by the Druze leadership from the Karablozeh massacre by Jabhat al-Nusra, and how do those memories inform current risk assessments?
The massacre in Kalb al-Loza, a small village in Jabal al-Summaq in northern Syria in Idlib province, was traumatic events for the Druze community. In this area, there were 14 Druze villages, totaling about 20,000 residents surrounded by Sunni majority. The central lessons that Druze learn from this event is the fear of infringement on their religious freedom, personal liberties, and of discrimination and constant fear. The memories of the Kalbloza massacre and the way Jabhat al-Nusra acted against the Druze serve as a warning against the possibility of similar events occurring in other Druze provinces under al-Shara's rule. In light of the bitter experience in Kalbloza, the Druze sees the Korean threat as a particularly severe. This strengthens the perception among the Druze leadership that they must be vigilant and resist any attempt to violate their rights. The Druze community in Syria sees itself as essential and unique component of Syrian society, with unique culture and value characteristics that should be preserved and respected within the framework of the Syrian state. The Korean risk assessments of the Druze are deeply influenced by past events, especially the tragedy in Kalbloza. This leads to suspicion regarding al-Shara''s declarations about distancing himself from Jabhat al-Nusra legacy and to a demand for concrete action rather than just empty declarations.
And thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll be back next week, Tuesday night at 9 p.m. on the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. What we heard today about the situation of the Druze, particularly in Syria, should raise many questions, especially as the Trump administration is taking steps to normalize with the Shara government by first lifting sanctions that have been imposed in the past with respect to the country's war crimes. I think protection for the minorities and general support for human rights and for humanitarian action. A new constitution that incorporates these rights and enforcement mechanisms and oversight and monitoring should be a strong part of this consideration before any sanctions are actually lifted. And I think all of that should be tied into any path towards diplomatic rapprochement that US is pursuing with Syria. Let's hope we'll see that happens and that the current announcements are not the extent of the Washington's thinking on this highly volatile and sensitive situation in light of what we just heard. Thank you so much again, and please stay tuned for our future programming, and thanks for watching tonight's discussion. Have a great evening.
Okay, thank you, Irena.
Thank you.
Hi, Irena. I would like to add many thanks to the Prime Minister of Israel, Mar Benjamin Netanyahu, and his government for the support and backing provided to the Druze in Syria, as without it, the number of casualties would have been much higher. Israel created serious deterrence against al-Shara and his forces. Also, thanks to the support of Sheikh Muwaffaq Tarif, the head of the Druze community in Israel, and the Druze in Israel who serve in the Israel military, whose support greatly protected the Druze and Syria in terms of deterrence. Additionally, I want to add that the connection between the Druze people and the Jewish people is ancient, dating back 5,000 years. The people most identified with the Israel people are the Druze, and the Jews are the closest friends and brothers to the Druze people, just as the Druze are the closest brothers and friends to the Jewish people.